Now, why think
Yeah.
big?
So this is actually the best advice that I've ever gotten, which is non-specific advice. But I had this boss, the first one that really saw something in me that and how far I was going to go. And every time I would bring a problem to him or bring together some frustration, he would just say, Emily, I want you to think big. And it wasn't like that would necessarily solve the problem right in front of me, but it would put things in the perspective that I needed to be able to move forward and move through it. And that just has always stuck with me. And it served me really well as I've progressed throughout my journey of thinking really big about what it is you're trying to do or what it is you're trying to say. And so it's just a mentality shift that really resonates with me.
Welcome to the Career Safari podcast. We're back. We're back with season 2, and it's our space to have candid conversations with women from around the world about their unique career journeys, because there are women everywhere carrying the torch for us so we can walk boldly on our own path. I'm your host, Wamita, and I'm, excited about this month's episode. And that's because we have the wonderful, wonderful Emily Tsitrian. Hi, Emily. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing great. It's a great way to kick off the week, Monday morning. Let's do it.
Monday morning, we got the coffee poured, and I think they say spill tea. We're going to spill some coffee today. And Emily, Emily is the author of Make Me the Boss, Surviving as a Millennial Manager in the Corporate World. She also currently leads a professional services team at Stripe, and she has spent more than 10 years in the technology field at various companies, from startups to more established companies. She's also the host of her own podcast, Manager.flow, and is a native of South Dakota and comes from a Greek and Armenian family. So welcome, Emily. Oh, we have a lot to talk about. This Manager book, I read it. There was a lot that you covered there, and we'll get into it. But so take us back. How would you describe your mindset about your career after high school, or like what they say, post-secondary school? Where were you? What was going on through your mind as you were in community college and filling all these different jobs?
Yeah, I had a mindset when I was in my late teens, early 20s, and even into my mid 20s of I just rejected that pressure of trying to figure out what you want to do with your life. It just didn't resonate with me. I could only figure out what I wanted to do that day or the type of friends that I wanted to make or the type of books that I wanted to read. And so it's not to say I didn't take my career or my education seriously. It's just that I felt I just wanted to learn about the world and learn about myself. And so I did a lot of different jobs. I worked in the catering space. I spent a lot of time making charcuterie boards. Um, I did, landscaping work, carpet cleaning, worked in a ticketing office doing customer support, customer service type jobs. And yeah, that wasn't necessarily like a straight line into the work that I do now, but I think sometimes that zigzag is what builds a really strong foundation of confidence. And most importantly, learning how to talk to people and learning how to deal with people. There is no profession in the world where you would not be well served having spent some time interacting with the general public or doing customer support. And so for me, that really led me to figuring out how to communicate, how different types of people like to be treated, and most importantly, where my interests and where my strengths were. And so I think like a lot of people in their early 20s, they feel very aspirational. I want to go change the world. And I thought, oh, okay, I'm gonna do it now. Yeah,
That's
you
so
should
me.
feel that.
That was me.
It's like kind of a millennial thing too.
Right?
We I wanted to go into public policy. I'm like, oh, maybe I should go work for Greenpeace or something. And so this all happened where I think there's a couple big tech waves. As I think you and I are probably in that a similar generation. There was like the big .com one, and I was like too young to really glom onto that. And then there was something that really big that happened right about when I was going to college, which was the iPhone. And a lot of people didn't know, what is this going to do? What is this going to do? But I feel like even then I could see, wow, this is really a new era of technology being totally woven into our lives. And I could see that people were making apps, and I could see people were starting to do all of their like social networking on their phone. And I realized, okay, I got to go into technology. Like, this is where it's at, and hopefully use the power for good. But I think I made a shift kind of, in college, of wanting to do something good and do something that I could feel proud of, and realizing that was going to be in the technology sector. And so that was really that pivotal moment for me of realizing I wanted to have a career in tech.
It's odd to me that I'm even in the tech space myself, because I refused to let go of my BlackBerry. I was the one, and I'm like, no, according till I die, I'm not getting rid of this.
I think they're still around, actually. I think
they
there
are. They are. And there's a whole community of people that are still like, our favorite phone ever was the BlackBerry Pearl. Like, it was our thing. But you're right. When the iPod and iPhone revolution happened, it was like, what can a phone do? Like, remote and control your house. It literally was. It was a game changer.
Right. And it makes me wonder, what is that now? What's the big game changing thing that's kind of like on the periphery? Like, is it crypto? Is it Web3?
Oh,
I don't know.
We could talk about that. I think the next era is space for me. That's where I think we're headed now. Space, commercializing space world. Who the heck knows what's going to be built up there? But like, I do think that what's next is space. So that's what I'm hinging my bets on.
Elon Musk has entered the chat.
Oh, there's other people that are privatizing space, but that's a different conversation. God bless him, though. God bless him. So, did you feel pressure? I mean, you mentioned that early on you kind of rejected the notion of, which was really kind of I'm a millennial as well. But I want to go save the world, and what is my great purpose? I remember in college there was a lot of conversations around what's our purpose, and I'm like, I don't even know. My purpose is to like make sure I wake up, get myself together. Did you feel the pressure, I should say, to try to have like this ideal career or this like huge purpose for your life at that time?
So a couple things. One, I went to UC Berkeley, go Bears, woohoo. It is UC Berkeley, with all of its flaws, is really does drive home the message that your education is a lifelong journey, and that they are not setting you up to know the answer, but it's to know how to think and to unpack things. And so that was really wired into me. I felt very lucky that I had some amazing classes, amazing professors that really oriented me onto my journey of like, what do you want to do with the time that you have? And the second that actually happened while I was at UC Berkeley is one of my roommates died. I was living in a house with some wonderful people. They were a little bit older than me. I was the only full-time student in the bunch, and I had a 30-year-old roommate who I was very, very close to. He was a carpenter. He was working on a roof, and he fell off the roof, and that was it. That was the end.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. It was terrible, of course, to have lost somebody so close, but it put so many things in perspective of, you just never know as you're kind of writing your book of life where that last page is going to be, and what do you want to do with the time that you have. And I think everybody has that moment eventually. You lose someone that's close to you. For me, it happened at a young age. That was like a peer, somebody that's your age. Like, it's not a grandparent. This is, and he was such an amazing teacher, one of the absolute best friends that I had. And it put a lot of things in perspective what do you want to have for your career? What do you want to feel proud of at the end of it? Or at any point when it suddenly is over for whatever reason, what do you want to feel good about having done? But also the people in your life are actually the most important thing. The people and the relationships that you create. And so when you think of your career, it's not just a series of having titles. Like it's not, your resume, like that's such an old format now. It's relationships that you've built, and it's conversations that you've had, and it's breakthroughs that you've had. It's people that you've touched and inspired to then go do their own amazing thing, and vice versa. And so that really influenced how I think about my professional journey.
So now that we know like where your mindset was when you started your career, how did you land in the technology space? I mean, you were at UC Berkeley, so you were around some of all the buzz that's happening, but there's a lot of places you could have landed. So what was it? How was that experience starting in the technology space?
It was dropped right into the deep end. I my first job right out of college was at a very large healthcare technology company based in Madison, Wisconsin, called Epic. It is the predominant healthcare electronic records company. Most people have not heard of it. They're privately held, a little bit secretive about what they do and what they do it. But I was given the role of being a project manager for these large scale implementations of this new system, this new healthcare system. And the application, or the area of the healthcare system that I focused on, was the emergency department. So somehow I must have registered as somebody that would be really great under a lot of pressure. And it's kind of funny because I think in tech, when things get really bad, we say a lot, oh, well, at least no one's on the table. Like this isn't like, you're not a surgeon. There's like an open, in this case,
people might be on the table.
People might be on the table. And so, but it was pretty cool because a part of the job was, you'd work with these large healthcare organizations, and I got to work with Henry Ford Health Systems, John Muir Health, these really inspirational large healthcare organizations that provide just amazing patient care. Work with them in their emergency department, in their trauma unit, to help them improve outcomes, the patient experience, as well as just the experience of all the healthcare workers, which we appreciate a lot more now after the pandemic. But the nurses, the respiratory therapists, the emergency physicians, as they're trying to care for those patients, having their technology that they're using to track everything that's happening with the patient not suck is actually really, really important. And being able to alert them, like, hey, this patient's, like vitals are going low, or this patient that's having a stroke, it's like time to give them their next, round of medication. And so it continued my journey of really seeing, like, holy cow, the impact of technology done well, both the design of the actual thing, but also the implementation of it, can literally save lives. And so that was just an incredible experience. It was kind of a boot camp for being professional. I mean, it was, travel every other week, or like 3 out of 4 weeks, working regularly, like 70-hour week. I mean, it's stuff that's not sustainable over the long term, but it was a really good experience to cut my teeth, learn how to run a meeting, learn how to talk to an software engineer, learn how to talk, de-escalate a situation with an executive, things like that. So I spent 2.5 years doing that, and it was a very large company, 7,000 person organization. And then I got the startup bug. I think a lot of us kind of get that itch that are in tech, like, what would it be like to work at a startup and
do it all from the beginning? Like, what would it be at the helm? Yeah.
So I went from a 7,000 person organization to joining as employee number 21 at a construction technology startup in Silicon Valley. Yeah. So I moved back to California. And I mean, this was pre-Series A. Like, there was, they just come out of YC, they were building their team. And the way that these early stage startups tend to work is, like, very early, it's software eng development programmers, whatever you want to call them. And then everything else is just bucketed into one. So there's no distinction between sales and QA and support and facilities and
Forget about
all of the.
HR. Forget about legal.
Oh, yeah. Wait, what is that?
Yeah.
So I think it's actually a great experience to have, because I got to kind of wear all of those different hats, and I have a really strong sense now of what are all those different roles. And it helps me now as a manager, as I'm giving mentoring to people and I'm coaching people, I can see clearly that, like, oh, hey, you're not a customer success person, you're a product marketing person, or man, you're not a product marketing person, you're a product manager. And really see what are all those kind of standard tracks, within the greater operations type roles in tech companies. But that startup, I was given the opportunity to build a team, to basically do what I had done at my previous company, which was project management implementations. And I spent 4.5 years building that team out. And that startup ended up getting a pretty sizable exit, which is what we say, in tech terms, you either get acquired or you go public. In this case, they got acquired. And so it was really fulfilling. That was probably the most formative professional experience to where I am now and what I'm doing now at Stripe. And then after spending a couple of years there, I went back into healthcare technology. And so I worked at a company called Castlight Health for 2.5 years, running at first a more technical team that had very specific technical operation I was responsible for. And then the second part, I actually led the implementation team. So right out of the box, you sold the thing, now you're going to implement it. And so my team delivered those implementations. And then just about a year ago, I joined Stripe, wanted to get into the fintech world. And I lead today the enterprise implementation team at Stripe, which is just thrilling. And that's what I do today.
Explain a little bit more about what the implementation, like, what does that mean for those that are not even touching this space?
Yeah, absolutely. So implementation is a role within what we call professional services. Professional services in technology, and kind of specifically in SaaS technology, is a niche but very important role and function that exists. It tends to exist more in like enterprise, big company technology where, it's not an app that you're deploying. It's not a consumer facing app, but let's say it's an accounting product, or it's an HR product that's going to span the entire company. And you have to have some pathway to go from whatever you're doing now to what you're planning to do in the future. And so the implementation role and function is the discipline that is taking a sales contract. Okay, we have sold this thing, and turning that into, okay, now we are using this thing. So it could be project management. It could be some of the actual technical work, the actual like hands-on keyboard. We're going to deploy the solution, build it out, whatever. Could be training and certification, like training end users how to use it. Change management. It encompasses a whole kind of series of functions that can get very, very big and bloated if it's, a major implementation, such as entire healthcare system switching over. Or it can be quite lean and focused if it's, we're just getting a project team spun up on something. And so that's the profession within tech that I gravitated towards, and that I've specialized in and have spent most of my career learning more about.
Yeah. And I think it's important to say this because I think when people say like tech jobs, the first jump is like to either the product side or the engineering side, which please, we definitely need more well-rounded product people and engineering people. But I also want to give light to the many other types of tech roles that exist within a technology company. Emily and I have a little bit of camaraderie here because I'm also on customer success and implementation as well. And yeah, it's complicated business. The larger the account is, especially if it's as they call it, always on product. So something that's integral to the business functions. The implementation work is critical. You want people to love the product. You want people to love the company. And you are really the face of the company and the product. So it's a very important role. So if anyone's been thinking about getting into the technology space, it's definitely something that piqued my interest, and clearly it piqued Emily's as well. But something that you have really narrowed in on is the management role. And to be honest, I'm saying people, but I mean myself as well. People have like a love-hate relationship with being a manager. And you talked about how at that startup you were at, that's where you really kind of like cut your teeth into like the management role, building a team, and you since went on and done that a few more times. And you know what you love about it, in my opinion, is like the money, power, respect of it all. You are usually making more money. You have the power and authority to do things at the company and to hire the types of people that you think would benefit the work and the company itself. You have respect amongst your peers and honestly in society as a whole. It's you have cachet if you say I'm the CEO, if I'm the director of, and I'm general manager. That has some, you know, panache about it. So there's definitely like that's like the love piece. You have the money and the authority and the respect to do things that you probably would have never been able to do. And then the hate side is also pretty poignant as well. It's like it's consuming work to be a manager. It's a lot of pressure to get things done, to make sure things are moving, to make sure you're either bringing in money, keeping in talent, etc. And especially in the last few years, when you add the COVID piece on top of it and the transition to working from home and the hiring and the firing of people, and really for women, many are already dealing with so much. We are. You're at home nurturing a family or tending to other people, and then you come to work and you have to turn around and lead a team. So I'm curious. So when you think about the manager role, how do you feel about it? Do you have that same sort of love-hate relationship, or it's something that you like? How do you feel about it? Let me not even lead you in there.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It is I'd be lying if I said I didn't love like the status and the respect and
Yeah.
getting to, you know, kind of be the boss, right? But it's leading a team today is, I believe, harder than it's ever been. And it's not just kind of, you know, telling people orders and then they do that thing. Yeah, it is sometimes that, but frequently what the workforce is demanding now more than ever is that relationship, and having a manager who is also their career coach, who is also involved and engaged in their life, who can really be so much more to an individual employee than before. And part of that's a shift in just how people relate to their workplace. I think most millennials and Gen Z make, you know, their social life happens in the workplace more than it ever has. You know, people aren't going to church as much. They aren't, you know, part of the, you know, the Masons, like
Yeah.
they don't have as much of a social structure outside the workplace. And so the expectation of what your manager is to you is so much higher. And so that's just the reality of it. It's not, I'm not saying it's good or bad. It's just the way that the workplace has changed. And then you throw in the situation we're in now, this ongoing pandemic. We're switching to a new normal of what does the workplace look like? What are people's working hours? And then you throw in, you know, now we're in this era of having really important conversations in the workplace about social justice, about racial justice, about mental health topics. And that's all good. And it's, you know, the line between work and life is becoming quite blurry. But it's a lot for a people manager to rise to the
Right.
challenge, you know.
Right.
So I think it's challenging, and I wouldn't say there's days that I feel hateful about it, but there's days where I think, can I just like not do this?
That's normal. That's normal.
What if I just like go and like I just want to like do the job? That's okay. That's probably when you need a self-care day, and it's very important that you're doing self-care.
Trigger alert. I need to
I
walk
know.
away right now.
There's sometimes when you can't walk away though. And I talk about that in my book, where there are certain things that will come to your desk where that is your P0. An employee resigns, there's some sort of escalation, like some customer or some internal person is escalating something to you because this is your responsibility. Let's say there's an HR related emergency, like someone breaks to you that, something bad happened at the company party last night, and you need to deal with it. And so you have to be prepared. Someone on your team has a family emergency. That's happened to me probably once a year, and you never know when it's going to be. It could be a weekend, it could be when you're on vacation, it could be whatever, and you have to deal with it right then and there. And it's a part of it. It's a great honor to play that role, but it is something that can be very tiring if you're not kind of taking that time to be at your best as much of the time as you can be.
Yeah, that's a great point. You do one. I never thought about just the fact that so much of our social structure is now built around our work environment. That that's an interesting perspective about that, and it puts additional pressure on management and companies to perform different, to treat employees differently, and that's why you're seeing companies come out with some amazing benefits around working for them. I think at the time of this conversation, Airbnb just announced this, all these like permanently remote, you can work 3 months out of the year somewhere else, but it's an understanding of like, there's so much of our life that's centered around what we do. And if you want some of the best talent, you have to figure out creative ways for them to have a healthy balance and perform at your job. So yeah. Did you feel that well, let me take a step back here. What do you think is like the biggest risk you've taken as a manager?
I think that there's been times where I would have done what I think people may have described at the time as a risky hire, like taking a risk on a person, hiring or promoting somebody that I just had a gut feel about and was willing to go to bat for, but maybe my peers thought, like maybe not the right profile or not the right time. And so I think that would probably be it.
And you talked in your book about how like that's one of the most important roles of a manager is to hire the right person. And you give a lot of tips on how to go about that. But what is it like? What is that gut instinct? Because some of it is gut. Like you can read the resume and the resume just gets you in the door. But then the interview says some other things. But like, what is that like gut instinct that goes off for you about if this is a good hire?
For me, it's behaviors. It's not so much what have you done and what's on your resume. It's, do you have that fire in your belly where you're thinking big, or where we're talking about something that you've done that like didn't go so well, or you wish you could have done over, and learning from it and wanting to do it better next time. And so it's kind of, it's measuring for people that are so hungry, but also are willing to learn and willing to make mistakes. And most importantly, learn from those mistakes. Everyone's going to make mistakes. And, I make mistakes constantly, but it's like kind of narrowing in on that things that the candidate will say or talk about that make me feel that they're coachable and that they are so driven to be coached and to get to that next level for them, wherever that may be, and everyone's at a different place on their journey. And I'm not going to compare a college student to an 8th grader in terms of what they can do. But it's like, what is that desire to get to that? And what can you self-correct and take that feedback and learn? And that for me makes me feel really confident that I've got the right person, even if they don't necessarily have like the exact right resume.
So their behaviors and you feel, you feel like you can, I'm curious. I really want to sit in on one of your interviews to see the questions that you ask. Maybe we should role play at the end of this. I can get some tips as well, but they are in her book. But staying in like the hiring and talent conversation. I don't know if you saw, I think it was a few years ago, Lean In did research about women in leadership. And it was what we know. Women are less likely to be hired and promoted. And the statistics look worse for Black women, and this is in the United States, and women with disabilities. But what was really interesting is they called out something called the broken rung. So basically, the biggest obstacle that women face that prevents them from becoming senior leaders is that first step to become a manager. So women aren't struggle with being promoted to their first people management role. So I'm curious about what was the series of events that led you to become a manager for the first time? I know you talked about the startup, but for them to say, hey, Emily, can you lead this team? Can you put this thing together? Was it a manager that believed in you? Was it just a series of crazy events? Like what was that moment like?
Yeah, so I want to address the broken rung comment. I completely agree. And I think that it is a very much overlooked part of the D&I conversation.
Mm.
I think there is a lot of effort and a lot of things being done well, in my opinion, to bring people into the pipeline and get people in the door and into that first role in a company. But the thing that's missing is then getting them into that frontline manager and beyond, frankly. And so you see a huge drop off in representation the further you go up. So by the time you get to the CEO, there's like one Black CEO, I think, in the Fortune 500.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's sadly one of the areas that I think as a frontline manager, it's on your shoulders to try to fix is like who you're coaching and moving into somebody that could replace you. So how did I get to be a manager? I got there very much by happenstance. And I think that this is an unusual way to do it, but within tech, it happens maybe more often than in other industries, where I just happened to be an early employee at this tech company. And so kind of by default, the people that had been there became managers because we were doing the thing. And then it was like, okay, go build a team. And so I didn't have, and that's not to say I wasn't performing or I hadn't had conversations about, hey, yeah, I want to go and do this and this and this. But it was very situational. And I obviously still had to prove myself. Well, maybe that's not obvious. I did still have to prove myself to be able to handle that and to be able to think about how would I hire somebody and how would I create a sort of team structure that does the thing that I now am just doing myself. But I did have a boss at that time that did see something in me and believed in me and was giving me not coaching on how to be a manager, but how to think about the business that allowed me to think about, okay, what is the right structure for this function, given the fact that we're trying to be a really big company. So that was immensely helpful, but I had no training on how to actually be a manager, which is why I decided to write the book, because I think a lot of people don't.
And we can tell. You do not know how to lead people. Sometimes we have been on the other side of those situations.
Yes, and it is probably one of the biggest factors, I think, in quality of life after your basic needs are met is having a good boss. Like work in every industry and in every level. Like that controls the quality of your life so much. So maybe we are trying to change the world here by
No, you are. You definitely are. Since you see where you sit in your various roles, can you give your insight as to why you think that broken rung situation exists? I know you talked about the pipeline, and there's some BS out there that says that there is not enough Black and brown women talent in the pipeline to actually fill leadership roles or to be seated at some of these large companies, which we know is false. It's a lot of other things related to recruitment and et cetera, and incentives that are given to hire from your own community. But can you kind of give your perspective about, let's say they are within the company, what do you see as the obstacles for women, and especially women of color, to being promoted to those people management roles?
So I think it's threefold. One, I talked about one of the riskiest decisions you're going to make as a people manager is who you hire. If you are a manager of managers, the riskiest decision you're going to make is who you promote to being a manager. And it is just true that promoting somebody into a first-time manager role from within is an inherently riskier decision than bringing somebody in from the outside who has done it. Because if you've got the wrong person as a manager, it is nearly impossible to unwind that. And it can take years. It can take years to undo a bad managing. So you are kind of incented to not do it because you're putting so much on the line and so much pressure on that person to deliver that you're not really optimized to make that decision. So I think this is a failure of corporate structure in that nurturing people for the first line manager track so that you've got a good solid bench of people is a big miss. And I think that's correctable. I think it's solvable. Like, put people in manager tracks, teach them some of the fundamentals. So when the time comes, like, it's not as risky. You've got people that, are close to it. The second is, what makes somebody a competitive and compelling case for a first-time manager role is being given a lot of micro opportunities to do that already. And so I think this is where a lot of that unconscious bias probably comes in, is like, let's say we've got a new hire and we need somebody to coach that new hire. And so this is kind of a management light opportunity. And so are people getting picked and asked to do that are, totally represented? Okay, now we've got a cross-functional opportunity and we've got some cross-functional work group and we need somebody to step up and lead the charge and go talk to so-and-so in another department. And is everybody given the opportunity to do that? And so it's a lot of those. And if you get to the point where, you're ready to hire a manager and you're looking at, okay, what have people done that shows me that they're ready? You're going to probably see some segregation there, simply because people haven't been picked or they haven't been raising their hands, and we need people to raise their hands and that sort of thing too. And then the third is mentorship. I think that if you can't see somebody that looks like you, that has a similar background to you in that role, and that can mentor you to becoming that, you're just less likely to have that road paved for you. It's hard to be the first one that's done that. Yeah. And so I think that this is also solvable too, is certainly there's women and people of color in management roles, but how do we formalize a mentorship structure so that there's access to that, of people that have a similar background that are trying to have that same career path. So I think those are some of the big hairy reasons why it's not happening. This is something I think about a lot. I'm curious. I want to do my part to solve it. And I think it's a little bit different for each type of group. But I think those are the big buckets of things that I see.
Yeah. And you said a lot there, but there's one thing that I really want to hone in on, is that trust factor. If whoever's in that hiring role, if they're hiring you if they're looking for a people manager and managing people, that's a costly role. And like you said, there's so much that is placed upon that person and having a good hire, so that hiring manager is really looking for someone that they can trust. And if you're already sitting in the company, then there's people are making assessments about you every single day. And the first question and this is just my perspective, is, can they trust you? Do they know that if they put something on you, they can trust you? And then that goes into your point about inherent bias. Have people been given opportunities to show themselves? What exactly is seen as valuable work? There's so many things that can go underneath that. But for women that are listening to this now and they're like, well, I want that dream title, like, and you talk about in your book about playing the long game, versus, having a straight shot to a certain title. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So I have this image in my book of what we had thought about as being the career ladder. And you got to climb the ladder, climb the ladder, climb the ladder. And so you go from being like a person that does the thing to now I'm going to be a manager, and now I'm going to be a senior manager, and now I'm going to be a director, and now I'm going to be a senior director and VP. And so you're so focused on like up leveling in your title. But by the time you get to the top, you just have essentially progressed straight up without having built a solid foundation of things that give you so much more strength, and an experience over the long run to be really, really effective by the time you get to the top. And so I think lateral moves are the way to go. The first half of your career, honestly, go lateral. If you are seeing that you're making a lot of upward progress, try something that's just to the left or just to the right of what you're doing. Work for a company that does something totally different, but you're doing the same role. Let me try product marketing at a healthcare company. Let me try product marketing at a consumer tech company. Oh, what's happening in the creator economy? And so then by the time you work your way up to, like, say, a VP of marketing, you've done a lot of things and you've seen a lot of different ways, and it's going to take you longer to get there, but you're going to be much more solid. And so we see this in the business world with, someone like Beyonce, who is incredibly talented, but also is just a friggin' career genius.
Yeah.
And if you look at the decisions she's made throughout her career, it hasn't always been to optimize for the biggest payout right now. It's been to be an investor in the things that she's trying to do. It's to partner with people that are a little bit outside of her just like immediate network, to build something, to go on some venture. Serena Williams, same way, really contemporary, brilliant business person. And if Serena Williams was just focused on, winning title over title over title, she probably wouldn't have built the network necessary to do the things she's doing now as a venture capitalist and investor. And she's got a clothing line, and she's, doing all kinds of interesting stuff in business. And so think like Serena, think like Beyonce.
Every day I wake up, how can I be a little bit more like Serena Williams?
Right.
First stop, go to the gym, girl. That's my own brain. Sorry. So I want to explore your book a little bit more. And again, it's called Make Me the Boss: Surviving as a Millennial Manager in the Corporate World. And you really covered everything. As I was reading through, I mean, you gave, email samples on how to handle like performance reviews, to what you mentioned earlier about dealing with sexual harassment at the workplace, to structural racism. Like, you went there, you did the damn thing. So congratulations on your book. And there are a number of things I want to talk about in relation to what you wrote, but let's start with, like, why did you write it, and where the hell did you find the time, given what you do?
Oh man. So I wrote it. I mean, this is like the cheesy answer, but it is actually true. I wrote it because I felt the book needed to exist and did not exist. And I was seeing people in my peer group, or just a little bit younger than me, just routinely getting into these management roles or wanting to get into management roles and not having the basics on how to do it. And so I started it in 2019. It was really tough, and I put it to the side. And then the pandemic happened, and then George Floyd happened. And I think for me personally, and for a lot of people, we were all kind of in this collective, like, oh man, what are we doing about this? Like, this is not okay. And for me, that very much manifested in, okay, I need to go and finish my book. Like, I have things to say, and I don't know I'm not an expert on police brutality or policing, and that's just, I will do the right thing, but I don't know how to solve this. However, there's systemic racism in my industry that I have seen, and I have opinions on how to deconstruct it. And so I'm going to do it. I'm going to go finish it. So that really inspired me. And so I finished the book. I really pounded it out through the rest of 2020, getting the initial draft done. It was horrible. It was absolutely a horrible experience writing it. And I talked to a lot of
Wow.
other authors. I did not enjoy it. And I was doing the thing that I was writing about as it was happening. It was like managing people and having one-on-ones and having performance things and having this and that. I did not want to then at 5 p.m. say, you know what, I'm going to write about how to do this, especially if I like didn't do it particularly well that day. But I kept, what else were we going to do as the pandemic? Like, I was being really safe and staying at home and all those sorts of things. So I will say that now I don't think I would have the time to do it in the situation that I'm in now. I've taken on, a big role here at Stripe. So it was a lot of the timing thing, but having it done was really important to me, and I feel really proud to have done it.
Well, thank you for being so honest about it being a painful process. There's a lot of people that are trying to write a book right now and, busy with other things as well. So it's good to hear. I mean, thank you for the honesty, I should say. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I actually had a book coach to keep me accountable. So that was a great investment. Anybody listening to this, writing a book, like hire a book coach. It's someone to keep you accountable, set micro goals. It is worth it.
Oh, thank you for that piece of advice. Where was your family in all of this? Were they like, keep writing the book, or they're like, there she goes doing her thing again? Like, was your family able to be there for you during this time?
They were. I spent a few months staying with my parents during the pandemic, as a lot of young people did. And they were, they bring me food and, talk to me when I needed a distraction and things like that. So it was really good. And I will say I had a lot of friends that were really supportive as well, and were working on their own creative things. And so we do things like, let's all just get on Zoom and like work on whatever we're working on. Like, don't have to talk. But just, yeah, it kind of felt like a cool little social thing. So so that was really neat. And I feel really lucky to have had so much support during the process.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's a great idea. I did a few Zoom things, but nothing about that. Ours was more about like, what's going on in this world? Okay. So there's a few items, like I mentioned in the book, that that really just stood out to me. Like I said, the entire book is excellent, but you talk about how to navigate your own personal bias. And you said, I'm roughly going to quote the book, I recommend doing some research into how to attempt to unwind some of the programming you've received in your life, so you can untangle inherent bias from the real, actionable, humane, and direct feedback you'll want to give your team. And you also talk about if your personality is fundamentally a fixer or an avoidant type, interpersonal conflicts may eat at you and could ultimately break you as a manager. So I'm bringing this up because it highlights something that I feel is very important. I just wanted your perspective on it, which is self-awareness. Why is self-awareness so important to you as for a successful manager?
Oh man. So I thank you for reading that passage. I forgot that I wrote that exact thing.
I gotcha.
Yeah, thank you. So how we show up in the workplace is almost always a derivative of how we grew up and what sort of triggers we have, and the role that we felt we had to play in our families, or the role that we felt we had to play in our classrooms. And so I think having an awareness of that, you can't like necessarily fix it. I'm not saying that it's something to be fixed, but knowing that, wow, I was somebody that in my family, when things were bad, when we hit a crisis, I was the one that stepped up to the plate, that made sure everyone was okay. And so that's why it's really hard for me when something bad happens at work and I can't fix it. I go into this like hero complex of, if I can't fix it, I feel terrible about myself, and I feel like I need to take action and do something. And so I think unpacking that a little bit just helps you understand why you're having such a strong reaction to something. Or if someone says something that like, oh, it just like really hurts you. Well, it's not necessarily that that thing is hurting you so much. It's because it's reminding you of XYZ. And so doing the work to be able to understand that, I think helps you kind of, move through your role in the workplace with a bit more levity, and just, being aware.
Yeah, actually, someone told me that a lot of the time your work conflict does mirror your family dynamics. So if you are able to thrive in a certain amount of like work dysfunction, what does that, like, think back to what does that mimic in your in your childhood, and you're like, oh, well, this is why I know how to handle this situation so well. But as you heal from your trauma, um, there's also a tendency to leave those jobs because you're like, I don't want to function in that way anymore. And you find a new place for yourself. So spot on advice there. And I do wish there was more managers that had that self-awareness and actually did some healing themselves, not just saying, yeah, I can be a bully and laughing it off. Like, no one likes you, a bully. Please stop being one. You also talk about like the biggest, I forgot the exact phrase for a minute. Let me look at it. I don't want to mess this up because it was so good. The one skill you really need to get good at. What is that one skill and why?
Oh, that is public speaking.
Mm.
It is so important for people managers to be solid public speakers, strong communicators. And I think a lot of other skills are going to vary based on your industry. You don't have to be like really, really good at all of the things to be a good manager, but to be a fantastic manager, you should work on your ability to deliver a message and deliver a vision and a plan. Whether it's in a team meeting setting, whether it's you're going to represent your team at some big cross-functional, interlock session, and you want them to feel really proud of you and like, yeah, like she's totally nailed it. Like you want to be able to inspire people with the way that you communicate. And it's, the good news is you can get better at it if you're not naturally good at it. Public speaking is an art and a science. But I think it is a critical skill to develop as you're aspiring to a management role. You don't have to wait till you get there. And then once you're in it, continue to get feedback and things like that. I was just at a big team offsite with my boss a couple of weeks ago, and I had the opportunity to give a really killer presentation. I was so excited about it. And I've been public speaking for years and years. And at the end of it, I said, "Do you have any feedback?" And she said, "You were so great. But on slide 17, you didn't quite nail this piece, or whatever it was."
Oh,
I was like, "Thank you." Thank you. I appreciate that. Always be improving. Always be improving.
Slide 17. Yeah. Thanks. Which means that you probably killed it if they can narrow in on just slide 17, right?
Oh yeah, it was good. It was a mic dropper.
Yeah, I can imagine. So, how can women in your field be happy and not overwhelmed, whether it's in the tech space or management? How have you tried to find that balance of like being happy and loving your job and not being overwhelmed?
I would like to read that book that answers that question. But I would say in the sense of feeling overwhelmed, one of the strategies that one of my mental health coaches has taught me is to put a fence around the day or around the moment or around the meeting or the hour. And so if you think about, there's this whole mountain of things to do and that are broken and that require my attention, and it gets so overwhelming that you think, well, how do I even start? It's like, break that into what is happening right now, and do I have the tools, and how can I get the tools that I need to tackle this exact moment or this exact problem? And so breaking it down into the pieces not only helps you, take that first step or survive and thrive in the moment, but it also can really help you move forward in a substantial way. And so so that's one thing that I recommend. And then as far as being happy, I kind of go back to the title of the title you challenged me to come up with, which is thinking big. And so any one thing that is challenging in the moment, stepping back from it and realizing what an amazing journey you're on, how much you've learned, how much you've grown, sometimes even in a short amount of time. Wow, I'm smarter this week than I was last week. Or thinking about, you know, for people like you and me, how amazing it is that we're in these positions and doing these things that we're doing. And what would our ancestors think if could they have even imagined we would be doing something like this? That's a really big deal. It's really special. And so keeping the big picture in mind, of how, what an amazing, you know, moment in history we're in. I mean, the fact that the, you know, science has been able to come up with a vaccine for this like really lethal infection in such a short amount of time using mRNA technology. I mean, that's the equivalent of putting a man on the moon, you know, in the time they did it in the 60s. We don't get that. And so we're in a renaissance right now, with human creativity and science and technology. And it's awesome to be part of it in any way.
Take a step back and realize you are smarter. I like that. You're smarter this week than you were last week. We are in a very unique space and time in history. And to be able to contribute to that is a gift. So thank you for that reminder. Oh, Emily, I've enjoyed this conversation so much. You've really dropped some gems and interesting perspective about what it takes to become a manager and what it means to be one. And I think it's you know, just talking with you, it just reminds me about, it's not just about getting to the title. It's about who are you going to be in it once you're able to show up in that role. And I think sometimes we rush to trying to get to a certain place in society. And then once you're there, it's like, so who are you showing up as? Like, what's your purpose there? You're now touching lives. You have, you know, you're feeding families in these roles. So, you know, being clear about who you are and how you want to present yourself is important. And I thank you for being so intentional in your position and as you wrote this book. Is there any last piece of advice you have for any women out there that's listening to your story?
Build a network right now. And even though it may not feel like that is the immediate next step you need to do in your career, it is so important. It's never going to be urgent, but it's always going to be important. So to have a coffee date, join some networking group, go on LinkedIn and add somebody that you just think is really interesting. Build that network now, and that will lift you into this next phase.
Oh, that's great advice. And speaking of LinkedIn, that is our torchbearer of the month, Emily Tsitrian. Emily, what is the best way for people to get in contact with you and to find your book?
Absolutely. So you can find my book on Amazon or any local bookstore or wherever books are sold. It is called Make Me the Boss. You can sign up for my newsletter at emilytsitrian.com. And I also post pretty frequently on LinkedIn, so feel free to give me a follow.
Yep. And for more information on her career safari journey, go to www.thecareersafari.com. Join our Torch community. Follow us on social media. Don't forget we're on YouTube now, so you can come and watch Emily and I chat. And until then, continue to pass the torch. Bye, everyone.